Hello and welcome to That's a Wrap, the last seminar in this series for preparing your lawn and gardens for the fall and winter. We have quite a bit of stuff to cover, so I'm probably going to speak a little too fast. If I speak too fast, please tell me. The studio audience, if you have way, try not to get me distracted, okay? And we'll try to stay online. Those in the chat room will have to wait till after the end of the seminar. Okay, so we're going to start off right away. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. My name's Carl, Carl Umetsu, and I've worked here for about 5 years. It's my retirement job. I'm a certified horticulturist. I have the hunk of paper on my wall and everything, and I used to run a landscaping business. We did everything. I did all the design work, and we did everything from cutting Mrs. Brown's lawn in the suburbs to fairly large industrial complexes and condominiums. We also did installation work like flagstone walkways and interlocking stone and plantings and that sort of thing as well. And I'm also a licensed spraying person, so got all kinds of stuff going on. Here I do all sorts of things. I wear many hats at this place. I'm on the information booth sometimes, and I'm also a salesperson, and I'm also the person who runs around and gets the orders. If somebody wants something that we don't have here on the yard, they send me out to go get it. My wife calls me a dumb cluck because I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So we're going to get started right away. Trees and shrubs. We're going to start off with those guys there. In the wintertime, your trees and things, sometimes they need some protection from various things, the elements and animals. For deciduous trees like maple trees and so on, you should probably protect especially the bottom foot or a couple of feet of the trunk from things like rabbits. Rabbits like to chew on the bark, especially if there's fairly heavy snow cover and there's no other food for them to get to. They like to chew on the food, on the trunk rather. So you can cover the tree with a wrap like this, and it actually goes around the tree trunk, and it protects it's made out of plastic, and you can it will protect the tree from the animals. We also have a smaller one here, and this one wraps around. Oops, sorry. This one also wraps around, and it actually locks together so that they can't unlock it and shoot the tree on you. But it's a good wrap. Now this one is adjustable. It does everything from say an 1 inch diameter tree up to probably about 4 inches. So it can cover a fairly large tree diameter. The other thing you can do is you can use tree wrap. This stuff here, you wrap it, you literally wrap it around the trunk. If you use this, you always start at the bottom of the tree and work your way up so that it's overlapping on top, going down the hill, down the tree. So that when it rains, the water rain and so on comes down the tree, it'll run down the tree and off the tree. It won't get trapped in the pockets. Okay? So, but this will also work. It helps. It's a synthetic material, and you can use it to wrap the tree, and it'll protect it from animals and so on. It'll also, if your tree is in a very exposed location, it'll protect the trunk from exposure to excess wind and that kind of thing. Other things you can use is you can use various kinds of deterrents. We have this one here. This one actually apparently works very well. It's made mostly mint, and I guess animals don't like the smell and taste of mint very much. So you spray this on your trunks and branches of your trees, and it keeps the bunnies and the deer away. This is Critter Ritter. Critter Ritter is basically hot pepper and hot pepper spray. And if you wanted to, you could carry this around and use it for mace. And again, it's the problem with this stuff here is it's organic, and so therefore, as time wears along, it's going to wear off the plant. And you'll have to probably renew it every couple of months, every month or so during the wintertime. This is Critter Ritter in granular form, and it's good for putting inside plots and planters and so on, keep the critters from digging around in there when you don't want them there. This is blood meal. If you're planting bulbs, and squirrels can just absolutely give you fits digging up your bulbs in the fall, this is a good sort of organic, non-chemical way to kind of discourage them. It's literally blood meal. It's like a powder form of cow's blood or animal blood, and you use it and you just kind of mix it into the top surface just above the bulbs that you planted. and the smell of blood keeps the animals away because they don't like that smell. It scares them away. They think somebody got killed there, and so they would rather not be around where somebody might have gotten killed and they might be next. So they kind of avoid it a bit. It's actually like a powder. Yeah. And then this is another a liquid chemical, liquid deterrent as well. Now, this mum here is not here just because it's pretty. This mum is here because I have discovered that mums is a natural deterrent to animals. I had a burning bush at one time. I had 3 burning bushes at one time. I'm down to 1 because the bunnies kept eating the bark off the bark. And so, and I know that insecticide out there, pyrethrum, old. I just have to wait. Here it's back. It's an old insecticide that was discontinued because all these other chemicals came along, and now that all those chemicals have been banned and you can't use them anymore, there's a lot of the insecticides that you see in cans, spray cans, and squirt bottles and all that kind of thing. They carry something called pyrethrin. They also carry a synthetic permethrin, and it died again, and they carry a synthetic version called permethrin. And it's basically the same thing, only it's the synthetic instead. What I do with the chrysanthemum at the end of the season when the flowers have gone all brown, and rather than say, oh, too bad, it's so sad, and just pitch it in the compost, I take this plant and I literally take it and I lean it up against the bottom of my burning bush so it closes the burning bush, and I have not had a bunny come to my house to eat my burning bush since. So it works really well. I put it up against my Japanese maple. I buy two or three of these things in the fall. Makes my house look pretty in the fall, but then there's also a good self-defense against the bunnies in the wintertime. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. So, okay. Yep. This is a pumpkin, and worst comes to worst, you can throw it at them. And then they'll just dodge it, and then they'll eat the pumpkin, so it's pretty harmless. Okay, so that's your trees and so on. It's a good way to keep them off. Things like some plants like rhododendrons. If you have rhododendrons planted in the shade like you should, and they should be getting morning sun and afternoon shade, if you've got them planted under a deciduous crown, a deciduous tree, then when the leaves fall off that tree, the rhododendron is now suddenly exposed to winter sun, and it won't like that. And rather than since it's an evergreen, and I don't really necessarily believe in wrapping evergreens that much, but if you have to, you have to. But you can use this stuff here. It's called Wilt-Proof. And Wilt-Proof is an anti-desiccant. So you spray it on your evergreens, and it keeps them from drying out in the wintertime. So evergreens being evergreen, they're active all winter long. So that means they're drawing moisture when they can, and they're expiring moisture and oxygen into the air when they can as well. If it's really cold out, they don't do that well, but when you get mild patches and stuff, that's what they do. And so with the rhododendrons, in order to reduce the amount of water loss through the leaves, you spray Wilt-Proof on it, and it keeps them from drying up in the winter. Otherwise, you could get sun scald, and the leaves go all brown in the wintertime. Also, if you don't like wrapping your boxwoods, your other evergreens from the cold, you bought evergreens for a reason. They're green all winter, and why would you wrap them in burlap if you don't have to? So you can use a Wilt-Proof to cover your evergreens as well. All right. Having said all of that, you can also protect your evergreens and so on with burlap. We have burlap. We sell burlap in rolls, and I would recommend that you, rather than just wrap the plant in burlap, say you have an evergreen tree, a juniper or something, a cedar, rather than wrapping the tree itself, I would tend to take some stakes like these here and go around the tree 3 times, build sort of like a 3-point system around the tree, and then wrap the burlap on the stakes. And then you can staple the burlap to the stakes rather than trying to find a way to sew it together. It's much easier. And that way it takes part of the idea behind the burlap on a tree is to protect the plant from snow load, and that way this there takes the weight off the tree from the snow, and that way you don't have to worry about that as much. And for small plants, you can always use bamboo stakes instead of 2x2 wooden stakes. If the idea of covering your plants with burlap against snow loading and so on is you don't like it, and you're not too sure about the chemical idea, you can always use something like this. Now this is green and blends in so well, but you can also buy it in black. It's just a plastic mesh, and you can use that instead of burlap to wrap your trees and shrubs, and that way that they are still exposed to the air, and they're still exposed to the sunlight and so on, and they will react more naturally to what's going on in their environment rather than having them all covered up. Okay. In the fall, with some of your shrubs, your deciduous shrubs, you may need to cut them back a little bit. You shouldn't cut back anything really hard in the fall, partly because of the fact that you don't know whether they might come back in the springtime. So for instance, a butterfly bush, Buddleias. Buddleias, they get really tall and rangy, and they have a bad habit of drying out if you leave them sticking above the ground too far. So in the fall, you should cut them back to about 4 inches. 4 feet, 4 feet, okay, about 4 feet. And that leaves some branches above grade that'll be able to withstand the snow and so on. And then in the springtime, you can cut them back to their proper length. The same thing goes with roses. Roses, you shouldn't, if you have tea roses or floribundas or grandifloras, any of the older fashioned kind of roses, excuse me, you can cut them back, but just cut them back to about 2 feet so that they don't wave around in the wind so much and cause damage to themselves by waving around the wind with the thorns and so on. Yeah, about 2 feet. Yeah. Okay. And then again in the springtime, those kinds of roses, the tea roses, the floribundas, and the grandifloras, you'll cut them, prune them properly in the springtime down to around 6 to 8 inches above the ground. In the springtime, you cut them deeper. Yeah, but you don't cut them too deep in the fall because, again, you don't know what's going to be left behind, right? How it's going to survive. So you need to cover your bases by leaving enough behind so that something will survive through the winter. Okay? Yeah, I'll get to that. Okay, so having said all that, yeah, so then the roses, again, you should hill them up somehow. You can either take soil. There's different ways of doing it nowadays. You can take soil, and you can, this is the old way, is to take topsoil and pile it up around the bottom of the bushes, up to about 8 inches or so, or a foot. And then, but the downside to that is you need a ready supply of soil because you can't take the soil out of the garden and pile it up against the roses. You need to import the soil from somewhere and bring it in there and then pile it up against the roses. And then you have to take it away from there and store it somewhere else. Okay, so that's the downside. That's the downside of doing that with soil. You can also use mulch, and mulch you can spread it around, and it won't. It doesn't become a bigger problem. It doesn't do the insulating job as the soil does, but it does help. Or you can use what is this? Rose huts, and those are made of styrofoam. And you put them on top of the roses, and it keeps the thing. You have to weight them down somehow because they're made of styrofoam. So, of course, on a good windy day, they'll blow away, and you don't want that. So you need to weight them down somehow, maybe pile some soil around the bottom of them and so on, and to keep them in place. Yeah. Wait, question? No. Yeah, and another thing I've seen other people use is they actually use these kind of things here, like tree collars, and they open them up wide, and they fill them up with leaves. So you can take some leaves and take some that and chop them up, or you can use mulch and then pack them in amongst the roses. The good thing about doing that way with other than soil is it's a little easier to clear it away from the rose plant in the springtime, and so you don't leave as much residue behind that you have to worry about. Okay, in the garden, once you've got all your plants sort of taken care of, you need to, and by this time theoretically you've pulled out your annuals. I'm a real believer in pulling out annuals fairly early. I know they're pretty, but I hate pulling out, say, impatiens after the frost has got them, because once the frost gets them, then they turn slimy, and pulling out slimy impatiens is just no fun. So I don't care if you're wearing gloves or anything. So I'm a big fan of pulling out the impatiens and so on well before we get much of a killer frost, and so if that's the case, once all your annuals are out, and even once you've your perennials might be cut back a little bit at this point and so on, you've got a lot of bare ground showing here and there. It's not a bad time to amend some of your soil. If you have vegetable garden, it's a good time to amend your soil as well, rather than waiting till springtime. When you amend the soil in the fall, applying something like manure or the compost, and incorporating into the soil, it has all winter to break down and incorporate itself into the soil, so it becomes more readily available to the plants come springtime. The microbes in the soil are active all winter long, and so they'll help to break down the soil. In this early spring, and through the fall, if it's still warm, the earthworms will come along and they'll pull some of that stuff into the soil with them and integrate it and mix it around as well. If you're going to, and when you do that, rather than just sprinkle it on the surface and leave it there, you should mix it in. And there's a bunch of ways you can do that mechanically with a little rototiller or something like that. If you have that, you can use that. I forget what it's called. It's a garden thing. You turn it and twist it. And I've seen people do that and they hit their toe with it. Or you can use something like a garden spade like this here, or a garden fork like this here. And a garden fork is good because it's got the tines, so that you don't pick up great lumps of soil, and also the tines will penetrate the soil more easily than a spade will. Okay? And then when you can use the tines to whack the lumps and break up the lumps and so on, and get things broken up better. Another good way to mix in soil, if you don't want to go quite so deep, is you can use a cultivator like this. And you can also use a cultivator to save your rake. And you can use a cultivator like that to mix the soil in the first 4 or 5 inches of soil. You can mix it in with that. And this kind of cultivator works really well. Because the prongs are all along the same plane, you get a good dig all along the same spot. Some cultivators have them in like a trident sort of fashion, 3 different areas. And they tend to sometimes maybe dig a little easier, but this will give you a little better mix. Okay. You can use manure. This stuff here, this is a mixture of manure. It's cow and sheep manure. It's mostly cow. We don't have a lot of sheep in Ontario apparently. Or we can use this here. This is sea compost, and sea compost is very good. It's made from stuff like kelp and shellfish bits and stuff like that, and it's actually a very good compost to use in your soil. Another compost that we carry is over here, and this is this great big bag here. And this can be used for a number of things. You can use it as compost in your ground, and you can, again, mix it in the ground. It's a granular thing. So what they've done is they've taken stuff like leaf mold and leaf compost and so on, and they've mixed it up, and then they've compressed it and dried it and then pulverized it so it's granular. So you can put it in, if you want to put it on your lawn, you can spread it out with your fertilizer spreader, or you can use it and you can easily spread it on your garden as well. Okay, it's a good time. And then in the fall, if your perennials are getting a little bit out of hand, you can start to divide them in the fall, and that when you just dig them up, a good way to divide your perennials is you can. The best way is actually to dig them up, take the whole thing out of the ground, take a fairly sharp knife and cut the roots and get a fairly clean cut. If you try driving your spade through it, you're going to do a fair bit of damage to the plant, and that damage will translate into a certain amount of death over the winter. And you think you might have a plant that's so big, and you may wind up with a much smaller plant come springtime, because where you bashed it around, it might get all might rot away over the wintertime. So a good clean knife is a good way to go about it. Things like canna lilies, they're not a perennial, they're an annual that you need to dig up. Your dahlia bulbs and so on, those things should all come out of the ground at this time. Then those guys, you would store them for next year. Some people throw them away, I don't know why, but some people throw them away. But you should just keep them, and all you have to do is keep them in a fairly cool, dry location. And I would sprinkle them with a little bit of sulfur or something like that to keep the fungus off, and keep some of the bugs away and so on. And that way they'll preserve them through the winter. In the springtime, you'll do your dividing in the springtime. In those cases, you again use that sharp knife and you cut the pieces off that you want. Cut away the rotted bits, and then you plant your new canna lilies and dahlias in the fall, or in the spring. Gladiola is the same thing. You pull your gladiola bulbs out of the ground in the fall, and then the old corm is stuck in the bottom, and you need to clean that out. Take a spoon or something and clean that old corm out, and before you plant the new corm back in the ground again. In the fall, you can incorporate things like bone meal into the ground. You can incorporate some fertilizers into the ground. Once plants go dormant, they don't use the fertilizer anymore, so they're not likely to grow and cause damage that way. And if you incorporate some of the fertilizers into the ground, it'll encourage early growth come springtime. The bone meal is a root and flowering sort of chemical. Well, no, it's not a chemical. And it will help the roots to develop through the fall, and then again in the springtime you get a little bit of start. Okay, in the fall, again, you're going to be cutting back your perennials and your grasses. I just learned a good trick the other day. Grasses. When you cut back your grass, you have two choices with grasses. You can leave them up through the winter for the winter texture, which is what I would personally do, or you can cut them back. But the problem with cutting them back, of course, is that you have nothing. For what you had before, what you had something, now you've got nothing. So if you wait till the springtime to cut them back, it's better. But anyway, if you decide to cut back the grasses in the fall, a good trick, and I never thought of it before, is you take string and you tie your grass. Okay, tie it into a sheaf. And that way you can cut it off at the bottom. You can use something like, rather than using snippers, you can use garden shears like that, and you can do a good job of cutting it. And then your bundle of grass comes off in a little lump rather than scattered all over the place that you have to try to clean up. Also, you can use that grass as a decorative bit. So if you want to use your grasses as decorations for the fall theme, you can use it sometimes in some of your evergreen displays in the wintertime. So it's a multi-purpose type of thing. Okay. How am I doing? Okay, so far so good? Lawns. Lawns are kind of everybody forgets about lawns, because cut the grass once more and that's it, you're done. But in the lawn, one of the things you should do in the fall, once the grass has gone more or less dormant, so anytime from here on out. Okay, I know my lawn I haven't cut for at least 2 weeks now, and it's not showing signs of really needing cutting right at this point. So I will cut it, but it's not getting to the point where the neighborhood association is going to call me. So it's not so bad. But it's a good time to fertilize. It's probably the best time to fertilize your lawn. Of all the times in the seasons when you're recommended to fertilize your lawns, the fall is probably one of the most important times. If you fertilize your lawn when the grass has gone dormant, it's still green. So since it's still green, it's still photosynthesizing. So if it's photosynthesizing, it's going to be using that fertilizer that you spread. And what I would recommend is this is a professional bag of fertilizer here, and it's really heavy, so I'm not going to pick it up. But it has a slow release component in it. 70% of this bag of fertilizer is slow release. That means that 30% releases almost right away, and it's available to the grass just after you spread it and you water it in. After that is a slow release, and the slow release will last up to, in a regular growing season, it'll last up to 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so if you put that on in the fall, the grass is going to use it. It's going to go green. It's going to stay green longer into the fall. So before it goes all really yellowy looking, and it will stay yellow even in the winter. Once you've put it on, and if you get a good snow cover, and then the snow cover goes away, you'll find that your lawn is still greener than the neighbor who didn't fertilize his lawn. In the spring, the grass will green up sooner, and you don't have to fertilize as early. You can wait till late May, because this grass, whatever fertilizer the lawn doesn't use in the fall, will stay more or less dormant in the ground, and then when the grass becomes viable again in the springtime, it will start using the fertilizer, but there'll be slightly less there, and it'll be almost all slow release. So that means it's going to have a very slower growth rate in the springtime, Grass grows in the spring anyway, no matter what you do. Whether you fertilize it or not, it's going to grow. So you don't need to fertilize your grass really early. So this will you'll carry your grass through the winter, and it'll pick it up early in the springtime, and it'll carry it right through till your later spring fertilizer application, which is when you should do your fertilizer in the springtime. Okay? So late fall fertilizer on your grass is really important. I'm a great believer in mulching. I've never raked up grass off my lawn ever since I moved into my house. Even when it's too long and the lawnmower keeps bogging out on me, I just mulch it. And if it gets really heavy, I just kind of run it over again. And then if it's still too heavy, I take out the blower and blow it around. But I don't believe in raking up the grass if I don't have to, because the grass helps repopulate the soil with fertilizer, with nitrogen and various leaf vegetable components that are good for the soil. And in the fall, I'm a great proponent of leaf mulching. Rather than raking up all your leaves and taking them to the curb and leaving them there for the city to come and pick up. And I have to admit, I do some of that because my tree is just way too big. But I prefer to mulch. And what I do is I'll just wait till late October, and depending on the kind of tree you have, mind you. Trees like oak trees, oak leaves don't mulch. Okay, they're way too hard and they're way too leathery, and they just don't mulch. And those guys, you really have to rake them up and do something else with them. The leaves from the Norway maple, way too leathery. They don't mulch at all. So those kinds of things, you really have to rake them up. Otherwise, if you leave them on your lawn, you're going to have dead patches all over the place. But my tree, for instance, is a great big tree. I think it's a combination red maple, silver maple. It's not an autumn blaze, but it's a cousin. And I'm not too sure what it is. It's about 4 feet across, so it's a huge tree. And in the fall, what I do is I just wait for the leaves to get dry and crispy, and then I just run it over maybe 2-3 times with the lawnmower, and it all goes. Now the whole lawn goes brown, right? Because you got all these little bits of leaves all over the place, but and it'll stay that way right through the fall, and you fertilize it, so that helps the microbes to take care of those leaf bits and the worms. By the time the middle of May rolls around, there's not one speck of leaf showing above the ground, and the leaves you'll have chunks up to about 1/2 inch left behind, here and there, little pockets all over the place, and there won't be one little chunk left above the ground by the middle of May. It's all gone. The microbes have done their job. The earthworms have taken some into the ground and so on. And so it's a good way to introduce compost into your lawn without actually digging it up. A good thing to do in the fall with your lawn is to aerate. People think of aeration as a springtime thing, and that's true. You can aerate in the spring, but it's also a good time to do it in the fall. Well, again, you're going to fertilize in the fall. When you fertilize in the fall, you've got the root activity going on. If you aerate the lawn, then you're going to make it more conducive for roots to grow under the ground. You're going to be introducing oxygen into the ground and so on. And if you top dress at the same time, it's a really good way to get the grass growing new roots and so on and getting kind of set for next year. It'll also help to rejuvenate a slightly tired-looking lawn, rather than going to all the trouble of resodding or doing the whole replacement sort of thing. And so it's a good way to take care of some stuff in the fall. Also, people dethatch their lawns a lot in the springtime, and dethatching is one of those things that may or may not be a good thing. It damages the lawn quite a lot when you dethatch. And one of the best ways to control thatching in the lawn is to top dress and aerate. If you top dress and aerate your lawn, and not necessarily both, but either one or both, you introduce oxygen and or microbes to the top layer, and the thatch layer will get broken down naturally by the microbes in the soil. Okay, so it's a good way to control the thatch in your lawn as well. Oh, I did roses. Okay, I'm moving right along. I might be done this faster than you think. If you have outdoor tropicals, then September, actually we kind of missed it, but September is the kind of time to start bringing them in. Okay, they shouldn't be brought in all at once, because if you bring them in all at once, they go into kind of shock because they're outside and all that fresh air and the sunlight and all that, and then you bring them into your pollution-filled house and with no sunlight. So you need to kind of get them used to the fact that they're going to be in that house for a while. So sometimes it's not a bad idea to introduce them slowly into your house, take them back out during the day, bring them back in the evening. And but before you do that, you need to take care of the bugs and fungus. Okay, you get bugs and diseases on those plants. You don't want to bring them inside your house if you have other plants inside the house, because then you're just going to spread them around. It's like COVID for plants. So what you need to do is you inspect your plants and make sure, see if there's any bugs. If there is anything out there, probably the easiest thing to use is going to be insecticidal soap. That's probably the safest way to go about it. And you can take insecticidal soap and spray, take it outside and spray all your plant down with insecticide. Do the stems and everything, okay? Don't be and try to make sure the whole thing gets well covered. Give it some time for it to go to work, and then I would rinse it off, and you can bring it in the house. If you miss your chance to do it outside, you can always use your bathtub. Stick it in the bathtub, do that, and just rinse it off with a shower, okay? Not on hot. And that way you can get rid of the bugs and fungus in your house. Another way you can do it, if you don't want to do the spraying and all that kind of stuff, is you can take, if it's depending on how big the plant is, but you could take a plastic bag, like a cleaner bag or garbage bag, whatever, and you can introduce some sort of, I don't know if they still have them, pest strips for your lawn that you can chop them up and put them inside, and then the vapor from those pest strips will kill the insects that are in there as well. Or you can use, there's a chemical, the pyrethrin. Pyrethrin has a residual effect. So in other words, it stays active even after it's gone dry. And it stays active for quite a while. So you could take pyrethrin, you could spray it, if you don't want to actually spray it on your plant, you can, but if you don't want to do that, you could take a piece of plastic or something like that, or even a little can or a tin or a cup, and put some pyrethrin in it, and sit it down inside the thing and cover the whole thing up with plastic. And that way, as the pyrethrin evaporates, it'll create a mist inside there that's toxic to the insects. Okay. Also, you can spray your plants with a fungicide like sulfur in order to take care of things like mildew and whatever that might be on the plants as well. Okay. One of the things that I would recommend people do is when you if you rake your leaves to the curb for the fall pickup, if you have a walnut tree, don't rake the walnuts to the curb, because walnuts produce this thing called juglone, and juglone is toxic to most other plants. So if you are introducing all these walnuts, which are fairly heavy in concentration with juglone, into the community compost heap at the dump, and somebody comes along and buys a whackload of your walnuts and puts it in their garden, they're going to kill all their plants. So so that's probably not a good thing. So if you don't want to share the wealth, then it's probably a good idea to get rid of your walnuts a different way. If you have trees that have lots of diseases in them, like Norway maples, for instance, for some strange reason, in the last 15 or 20 years, Norway maples have come down with a disease. They call it tar spot because nobody else can think of a good name for it. It's just a big black dot on the leaf of your Norway maples. And if you take that and put it into your compost, if you put it out to the street for the compost, for the leaf pickup, if you put it into your compost bin, or you mulch it in your lawn, all you're going to do is cause problems next year, because the spores from those fungus will still be active in the ground, and as soon as it gets warmed out in the springtime, they're going to come out of the ground and they're going to infect all the trees around them, and it's just going to get worse and worse every year. So if you have that sort of situation, make sure you have good cleanup practices, and don't put it into the brown bag, okay, because that goes to the composter. You need to put it in a garbage bag and pitch it, because that's, or if you happen to have a burning thing, you can burn them if you want to, but that's only if you're above number 5 highway. I think that's about it. Any questions? Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I think in your case, you were talking to your husband about that. It's probably not a bad idea, because you've exposed a lot of the inner plant to sunlight that it never had before. And so it wouldn't be a bad idea to give it a shot with the wilt-proof to protect what leaves are left for the wintertime. Dormant spray goes on in early spring. It's going to be late March or early April. When it's mild enough outside to spray without things freezing when it hits, and it needs to stay on the plant long enough to dry before it freezes at nighttime. It's okay if it gets cold enough to freeze at night as long as it dries up before it gets that far. Dormant oil is a chemical that, well, it's not even a chemical, it's literally an oil that you spray on your plants, and it smothers things like overwintering eggs, any insects that might be hiding in little nooks and crevices here and there that you don't want. It kills all those guys through the winter. Also included in dormant spray is often sulfur, horticulture sulfur and lime, and that's a fungicide. And so if you have overwintering spores from fungus that you like mildew or whatever you have in your plants in the summertime, it helps to kill those spores as well. So it's a good thing to use early in the spring. If you have the problem, if you don't have the problem, don't use it. But if you have a problem, then it's a good thing, good way to get rid of it. Gypsy moth eggs. I think if you were to use dormant oil on them, it would probably work, but you'd have to really saturate them. Like you couldn't be just do that. You'd have to really give it. But it would probably work. Rather, that'd be probably easier than picking them off or squishing them. No. It just covers. It's almost like an oil. It's not oil, but like an oil, and it just covers the plant and stops the water from evaporating out of the plant. Because all plants, they do what's called transpiration, and so that means they release moisture just like us when we sweat. It's the same thing. And so they release moisture into the air as they're photosynthesized as part of the byproduct. And so that will stop them from doing that as much in the wintertime, so that they won't dry out as much. Okay? Yep.
So ideas on improving the quality of grass under
Pine
pine trees.
trees are generally acidic. So if you have, you should rake up the needles as best you can. In that case, I would use horticultural lime and or gypsum. It's the same thing, and spread that on the surface. It will take a few years. You can't do it if you do it too much at one time. It's toxic to the grass, so you need to put on a little bit, and you have to follow the instructions on the container, and spread it around and get it to slowly make the soil more alkaline. You have to be careful because if you make the soil, what kind of pine is it? White pine. If you make the soil too alkaline, then you're going to be detrimental to the pine tree. White pines are very sensitive to iron in the soil, and they'll go yellowish in the summertime if they don't get enough iron. And if you make the soil too alkaline, then the iron stays bound up to the soil particles and won't release to the plant. So if that's the case, then if you want to make the soil more amenable to grass, then you need to amend it so that there's slightly more alkaline, but then you might want to add iron to the soil, chelated iron, in order to get the pine tree to green up.
Would that be a fall application?
I would do chelated iron in the springtime, and it may be maybe a couple of steps through the summer, rather than just one time. Pachysandra, if it's going yellow, it's probably getting too much sun. Yeah, it's probably getting too much sun. Pachysandra likes it in the shade, and they like acidic soil, so they should be very happy under a spruce tree. Yeah, so if it's got a high canopy, then it's probably getting too much sun. Pachysandra hates the sun, and it just turns yellow and looks odd. So if that's the case, again, making the soil more acidic might help. Adding some iron to the soil. You can buy, sometimes you can get iron in a foliar spray, and you can spray the surface, the leaves itself, and it helps to green up the leaves as well. And then you can get it into the ground, and so that it picks it up out of the soil as well. No. Unfortunately, no. We don't have that. We haven't carried iron here for a while. It's just the way it is. Any other questions? How we doing with you? 3 online? Okay, I'm going to answer a couple of questions here. Susan says, I've noticed black mold and magnolia scab on my magnolia. What's the best way to treat them? Okay, Susan, what you probably have is a really bad case of scale. And scale is an insect. And the scale is it's a little sucking insect, and what it does is it hatches in the spring, and then the hatchling comes out from under the little shells that are on the tree, crawls along a little ways, stops, plants its mouth parts into the bark, and then slowly forms a shell for next year. If it's a female, the males will come along and they'll pick up the peck and they'll mate and they'll have eggs inside there. The only way to get rid of scale is the best way is actually dormant spray, okay, in the springtime, because the dormant spray will smother the scale that's on the tree and any eggs that are under the scale. The black mold is actually called sooty mold, and sooty mold is attracted to the magnolia because of the scale. Scale produces a liquid called honeydew. It's like aphids, and they get sticky. And when they're in their active state, they produce a lot of this honeydew, and it gets all sticky. And the sooty mold is kind of blowing along, and it goes, "Ooh, somewhere to stop!" And they stop at the stop where it's sticky, and then it starts to multiply. So pretty soon, the gray bark on your magnolia goes black, and there really isn't anything you can do about that. You can put fungicide on there, like sulfur or Bordeaux spray or something like that, to stop getting any worse. But there it goes. But the blackness will not go away. If it's a young tree, the tree will probably grow out of it because the bark grows along with the tree, of course. And because of that, if you don't get any more sooty mold applying with scale, then the silver bark will probably start to come back. And after a while, the sooty mold will wear off the tree with rain and that sort of thing. Don't take sandpaper to the tree. That's a bad idea. Okay? Oh, you're welcome. Susan is very busy. Susan also says, does the mold on Norway maples affect other trees and shrubs as well? Oh, she's probably talking about tar spot. And tar spot does affect other maple trees, but not to the same extent. And if the amount of cross contamination will be a lot to do with how close other trees are, whether or not they're downwind mostly from the infected tree and so on. But the Norway maples are the most susceptible, but other maple trees do get it. Non-maple trees don't seem to get tar spot. The magnolia is over 2 stories high, so spraying it be hard. If it's that tall, then you might want to employ a tree service and a high-pressure sprayer to reach the top of the tree. And Beverin Pickard says, we cannot always hear the audience questions. Sorry. Unless I guess if we went around to the various people and used the microphone, but the problem with that is, of course, then I would be breaching the 6-foot social distancing rule, and we can't do that. So sorry, Beverin. We'll have to try to think of some way to get that work out later on. Anything else? No? That's it? We're done. And we're done.